Right, good evening, everybody. I hope some of you bared with us last week with our slight technical fail last week. We're not going to have that this week. Everything is working okay at the moment. Salas and I did just have one technical hiccup, but we're getting there and think we've worked it out. So sorry again for last week, and hopefully we're going to, I still haven't set a date, but hopefully next week I'm going to record it with Tim, and then I will share that recording with you all. But tonight we have grazing for climate resilience, reducing inputs and profitability. And our speaker this evening is Silas Headley Lawson, who is a farmer, coach and consultant. He's got lots and lots of experience within regenerative agriculture. He divides his time between the Cotswold Cattle Company and his co-owned food and farming venture, Grass-Fed Farmer. He's agri-ecological coaching and his agri-ecological coaching business. He's got roots within agriculture, both commercial and direct selling models, and he's got ties to New Zealand through his family dairy farm and kiwi orchard there. He champions lean, profitable farming systems that deliver increasing biodiversity and also soil health gains. He was also he is an integrated soils trained agroecology coach from the Yellowstone 2024 cohort. So he is a wealth of knowledge, and we'll probably try and keep the questions till the end. So if you have got a question that you really want to ask, either write it down or pop it in the chat, and we'll come to the questions at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass you over. Salas, over to you.
Thanks, Katie. That was a bit of a mouthful. Might do a shorter intro next time. I'm going to share
getting my teeth around agroecology.
Yeah, that's it. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Here we go. Right, is that how we want it, Katie? Because I can't.
Yep, that is how we want it. We can see it. It's not black. Perfect.
Cool. So, as Katie said, I am a farmer, currently farming the Cotswolds, which is our Cotswold Cattle Company. We basically integrate our native Angus suckler herds into like big arable farms with some permanent pasture, and then we turn them all into smash burgers and sell those all cooked and hot through our catering trailers. The other half of what I do is under this Grass-Fed Farmer label, which is one-on-one support, coaching, consultancy with farmers across the UK, as well as kind of doing workshops and training days with farm advisors and farmers. So I imagine there's quite a little spread of where you guys are across the country. Yeah, I travel around a fair bit. As I say, the farmers I support kind of range from Isle of Wight and Devon all the way up to Northumbria and the Lake District and everything in between. So what I'm going to talk today is just a little bit around how I frame the grazing systems that I've developed, that I've run, some of the data and some of the outcomes we've seen on those, and also kind of, again, like the kind of processes that we go through in looking at grazing systems with another farmer or a client. I also work with arable farmers and mixed farming clients, so pretty mixed bags. So a lot of what you're going to hear tonight isn't just kind of relevant to grazing in livestock, but I've framed it around that to be more relevant for ABP. So I won't jump into that straight away, but for me, grazing systems, we often hear, oh, well, you know, all this grazing for nature and wildlife, that's great, but you can't make any money from it. And actually, in my experience, when we get the system right, we can graze for increased climate resilience through better soil health. And through that, we are able to reduce inputs, improve gross margins, and get better profitability, whilst also achieving increased habitat and environmental benefits. So I'm quite excited by all this stuff, and it's obviously why I spend my time doing it. So I was going to throw it out to the room, but I can't see you guys, but I'll do it anyway. What are some of the things that you guys think make a resilient grazing system, or even just a farming business in general? Maybe someone could shout out, or Katie could nominate for me.
Yeah, anyone, if you want to just unmute and say what you think. Go on then, Nigel.
Ability to withstand shocks, either weather shocks or financial shocks.
Yep, two really good points there. Any others that people can think of that, you know, they think about or might be relevant to them or their context?
Kate, can you hear me?
Yeah. Carry on, Paul.
Yeah. Well, we sort of work on try to grow as much grass as possible, try to utilize as much grass as possible, and try to keep as tight a control on costs, especially the costs against your suckler cow. If they increase, the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of direct cost and that gross margin piece, right? If you're losing money per unit, the last thing you want to do is have more units. So yeah, when you start to address that, it can have a really big impact. Any more before I move on?
No, a balance.
Oh, yeah. What was that? Sorry?
A balance.
Yeah, a balance. What do you mean by that?
For balancing what you've got on farm to be able to produce the best you can from the resources that you've got without having to bring lots of other things into the farm.
Yeah, maybe more control then. Yeah, balance and control over the system as well. So what I've put up here isn't like the answers or the only thing. This is just some ideas. But for me, the number one thing is how do we utilize as much free energy as possible? Because in any farming system, all we are really doing is converting energy that we can't consume into energy that we can consume. Meat, milk, fiber, cereals, vegetables, whatever it is. And, you know, we can obviously buy energy. We can buy diesel, we can buy fertilizer, we can buy in feed. But actually, that will cost us money. And there's one point there about that kind of gross margin piece, those direct costs around our sucker cows or whatever else they might be. So the more we utilize where the free energy is coming from, which is basically grass produced through photosynthesis, which is the main driver of all natural systems that are based in soil, whether that's a farm in Staffordshire, a ranch in Montana, or the Amazon rainforest. It's all functioning off of photosynthesis, carbon cycles, water cycles. So how through our grazing management can we enhance the amount of that, or like unlock that bottleneck in that kind of photosynthetic potential on our farm? And with that, we start to unlock the potential of soil function. So this is, you know, our soil acting as that kind of medium that is producing all of the pasture, all of the crops, but actually how fit, resilient, how many minerals are flowing through that soil into that pasture, into those animals. How much water is it holding on to and storing, you know, that kind of effective rainfall. We're going to come onto all this a bit later. So that soil function piece, again, driven by photosynthesis. And with that, we are able to do better in drought situations. Our grass can keep growing, can stay green with good grazing management and functional soil. When it rains heavily, we can hold on to that rain. We can soak it up like a giant sponge instead of it hitting concrete and sitting on standing water or running off down into, you know, the streams or the rivers. Low inputs and higher margin. So in some systems, we may actually find we're better off having a lower stocking rate, but removing a lot of direct costs. So it's really worth like evaluating what that nice balance point is of the stocking rate that stacks up the best. It's not really about the yield you're producing, it's about the profitability, you know, per hectare, if you like, across your farm. So inputs and margins. High performance for that livestock piece, for me, that's really sitting in those two dynamics and the balance between fertility and daily live weight gains and finishing times. Now, it can be a tricky balance because generally in livestock, we've got two strains of hormones. We've got our reproductive maternal line type hormones and growth hormones. So even within a breed like an Angus, like what I have, you're going to see those bigger, more kind of conventional type animals that are higher on that growth hormone. They need more energy, they need more resources to grow and to finish. Whereas the little fat native ones that I've got, they've kind of got more on that maternal line type hormones in terms of their breeding and genetics over time. So getting the right animal for your system, and it's not saying that one's better than the other, it's just matching things up for the system that works for you. Alongside that is that diversity piece. So in resilience full stop, there is resilience in, so that there's resilience in diversity of microorganisms, seeds, plants, and animal species as well. So that's why we have like these big seed banks, like locked under the mountains in Norway or whatever. It's to bring us future resilience in case we, for food security issues. Same in pasture. If you've got one type, if you've just got ryegrass and clover, guess what? Your pastures are only going to be productive when it's the optimal conditions for ryegrass and clover, which isn't very often. That's kind of mild, wet, spring, autumn. As soon as it's cold, as soon as it's dry, those things just aren't productive. And they're also quite dependent on nitrogen inputs. So the more species of plant we have, the more we have plants that can function in a drought. The more plants we have that can function in later in the season or come in earlier in the season. So we get more overall pasture productivity, as well as more nutrient cycling from the soil into our pastures, into our livestock. So our livestock perform better because that breadth of diversity is able to draw up minerals in different ways than another plant would. Linked to that mineral cycle I just described, we're going to start to see lower vet and med bills. Antibiotic usage, just general health issues will massively drop when the animals are getting more micronutrients and out of that soil system. Again, all linked with grazing management, energy cycles, and diversity as well. Got these environmental services. This is what all the kind of non-farming stakeholders get excited about. Our ability to reduce flooding further downstream. And again, wider biodiversity and ecosystem and habitat, all that kind of thing. Golden hoof, where I'm in the Cotswolds, loads of massive arable farms. And lots of friends of mine, I'll give you an example. My friend Ed Horton, quite a large farmer here in the Cotswolds, about 6,000 acres. The sheep in his system play a massive role in improving the gross margins on all of his cereals, through that golden hoof of grazing his cereals at the right time of year, around about now in February and March, and encouraging that tillering, but also the root of that cereal plant to get deeper down into the soil, so it's more stable. It's got more access to moisture and nutrients when that grain, when the wheat or barley, whatever, starts coming up in the spring. So the sheep might not make billions of pounds, but it sure makes the gross margins on the cereals better. But again, getting the right animal and the right system. So you wouldn't want to do that with cows, but then if you're going to go down the route of putting in diverse cover crops to, try and address some soil health issues or something, then perhaps cows might be a better option to help terminate those. Also, that kind of consumer perception and demand. I'm sure Katie's got some insights with that, kind of where trends are going both up and down the supply chain. But that resilient piece, how can we supply markets and how can we find premium markets or new markets with what we're doing on farm? Obviously, there's that meat, milk, and fiber quality. It's all linked. So as we get more energy, more as our grazing management improves and we're able to cycle more carbon, get more minerals flowing from soil to plant to animal, it changes and improves the chemical composition of the meat. Growth rates and everything else, flavor profiles, nutrient density, all that kind of thing. It's really fascinating. So obviously the supply chain interest, a lot of big companies saying, we want this kind of product that's grown in this way. So can we align those and maybe get ourselves better contracts? And other markets too, right? There's a lot going around, especially in the UK, lots of SFI, high level stewardship, BNG, take your pick. There's a lot of them out there now. Carbon credits, like a lot of it is linked to what we are doing on farm and can we actually tap into more income streams for those. So just some ideas. So how can we actually deliver on that? So for me, grazing can achieve all of that. And it's making a context specific, it's going to be a few big words here, holistic approach to grazing management that focuses on soil function to achieve profitability and environmental gains. A collaborative system where nature does the heavy lifting. Now, it sounds a bit woo-woo. It's like, well, it goes back to say what I said about that free energy. The more energy that you can produce and sell from natural processes, i.e. growing grass and cycling carbon and all that kind of thing that produces you more beef instead of you having to buy energy. Every time you sign that check to the FERC guy or the feed guy, your direct costs are going up, right? And as those costs change and fluctuate, then your margins get affected quite a lot. So that's nature doing the heavy lifting. She's producing more for you, and you're partnering with her through your grazing management to allow her to do that. So what I'm going to dive into now is how I frame what's really going on in farming systems. And we'll look at this specifically through a grazing lens today. But again, as I said, this is applicable to any system, whether it's arable, horticulture, vineyards, or even just like the real wild, right? So we have what we call these ecosystem processes. So these are things that are just happening. They're happening around us, and through our management, our human management of land, we are either kind of utilizing these for productive gain and for our own business benefit, or often we end up trying to fight them, or subconsciously without knowing it, we end up kind of turning taps off and bottlenecks into these processes, making them less efficient. So the first one, they're all intrinsically linked. The first one is this big carbon cycle. So this is really that energy cycle that drives life on Earth. I'll stop quickly, Katie. I usually set myself a timer and I haven't. So will you give me like a heads up when we're at like, what, 7:45?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
So the energy cycle is basically what drives all life on Earth, right? Everything that we eat, everything that we consume, everything that we wear, the wooden table that I'm sat at, my car outside, right? It's all linked to the movement of carbon through the atmosphere into the soil, into plant biomass, and then it's either harvested as trees, as crops, as pastures, as meat, milk, whatever. So the more of this we have, the more efficient it is. Essentially, the more productive and energy there is flowing through the planet, basically. And the medium for this, kind of the thing in the middle, that's the conductor, if you like, is soil. And the things that plug it in are the plants. So that energy is coming from the sun. So the liquid carbon pathway, this is the number one focus that we want to be thinking about in a grazing system, particularly in the growing season. So the liquid carbon pathway is basically photosynthesis. So pasture plants, as well as any other plant, are basically giant solar panels. So the bigger the solar panel and the more effective they are, then the more carbon we're going to start cycling. They're going to take carbon out of the atmosphere, and depending on the plant chemistry and all that kind of thing, we can get into the details of that if you've got questions later. We're going to exude sugary carbon exudates into the ground through the roots. Now, these sugary carbon exudates, they're like an energy pack, and this is what feeds all the soil microbiology. So all this living biology in our soil, which we're learning more and more about every day, it's the same as this. It has the same needs that we do, or that our cows have. It still needs food and energy, it needs air, and it needs water. So if our soils are compacted, i.e., if we dig a hole, and maybe some of you guys that have been doing this or seen it on farm walks, and I urge you to take a spade out with you tomorrow and just start poking around the farm and seeing where things look differently around the bottom of the valley, the top of the valley, in the verge, out the field, by the river, whatever. We want to see this lovely kind of loose, cakey, airy, fluffy structure with these little soft kind of round, crummy type looking things that look a bit like cake, chocolate cake. So that's like a lovely soil, well aggregated structure, and that's been created by soil biology letting off all the little biotic glues that they let off when they come to feed on the carbon exudate that the plant has put in there after photosynthesizing from the sun. So when we have a compacted soil, that kind of hard, firm, blocky, it's like concrete, heavy, there's no air, there's no structure, kind of sharp, angular angles to it, we're missing that. There's no space, there's no air for that biology to move and to breathe and to live. There's also no space for the water. So how do we address compaction? So compaction is the reason why we're getting waterlogging in our fields. It's the reason why our pastures might be burning off as soon as we get a couple of weeks without rain. It's because there's no water in the soil for our plants to find, because when it rained, there was nowhere for the water to go. So what our key focus needs to be is to fix the compaction issue. And that's not by subsoiling or anything like that, If you go in and cultivate or put a subsoiler in, all we're doing is pushing the compaction apart. We're making a space for the water to go, but it's not accessible by the plants. It's not accessible by the biology. And it's photosynthesis that fixes compaction by feeding the biology that is there. And the power of roots. Roots will push down through soil compaction if you let them. But for roots to do that, big, dense, strong, deep roots need to have big, strong, tall plants. So this is when it comes into like our pasture, our opening covers and our residuals. We basically want to make that solar panel as big as we can. The bigger the solar panel, the bigger the plant. The bigger the plant, the deeper the roots. The bigger the plant, the deeper the roots, and the bigger the solar panel, the more carbon we're going to get going from the atmosphere into the soil. And the more of that we do, the more biology we will feed. And the more biology we feed, the more we'll fix compaction and create soil structure. And it's also how we can get carbon into the soil and locked up where we want it, which is why it's called that slow cycle. It's more secure. The next one is the decomposition cycle. So this is the fast cycle. Basically that kind of here for a good time, not a long time. This is kind of how we can actually start building soil and lifting organic matter, feeding biology as well. But I really focus on this at the end of the season, or if it's dry in the summer, or if it's in the winter and you've kind of got a stockpile of more mature pasture. So think about using livestock to trample mature, dense pasture into the ground. You use stocking densities by different amounts of animals and different shapes of areas. You can use electric fencing to create that if you need. But you want to do this when the plants are kind of more of that brown color. So when we look at a grass plant, our pasture in say May, for example, that's bright green, that's high in nitrogen. High in nitrogen, and if we trample that in, it's just going to feed the bacteria in our soil. And generally our soil is going to be bacteria dominated in a farming context, which is not what we want. We want them to be more balanced with bacteria and fungi, ideally about 1-to-1 if we can. When we feed brown stuff in, this is the same as like what you might do in the veg garden. You mix grass cuttings with wood chip or something like that. When we trample in that brown mature pasture, it's higher in carbon, same as straw. Yeah, straw is really high in carbon, so is wood chip, so is that mature brown pasture or hay bales. So when we do that in the winter time, we're putting more carbon into the soil. So we're addressing the carbon cycle 12 months of the year then. In the growing season, when everything's green, we're focusing on maximizing photosynthesis, making the solar panel as big and powerful as we can. And then when it's too cold for the biology to be active and everything stops growing, like now, November until end of April, think about your carbon cycle, but it's looking in a different form. It's decomposition. So this is all linked to that water cycle. So I mentioned earlier, right, we've got that photosynthesis and there's nice deep roots pushing down into the soil. So what we want to, how we do that is in grazing, we just don't want to stress the plant out. As soon as we start overgrazing, which is basically staying in the same place for too long or coming back to the same place too quickly, that is overgrazing. So once the plant has been grazed, it needs to fully recover before we should be grazing it again. And that looks like a nice pointy grass tips instead of like nibbled sideways ones. So that looks different at different times of the year. In the spring, that recovery period is much faster, right? In May, everything's going nuts. Everything's going super fast. But then when we get into like early August, then it's a bit drier maybe, and there's less rainfall about that. Recovery period is probably longer. So our rotations want to mirror that. Quicker in the spring, longer in the summer, probably quicker again in the autumn, and then really long in the winter. Some systems we might be trying to graze all year round, which is what I do. With lots of you guys, maybe it's more a case of actually how do we just keep animals outside for an extra 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 3 months than what we normally do before we house them. Because it might not be saying, right, that's it, we're never using sheds again, we've got to keep everything outside. But if we can graze effectively across the whole year, we can start saving money on that housing period. And that all starts in the spring by not stressing plants. So in the springtime, I generally want to graze as little as possible and leave as much as I dare behind without coming back too quick. So that might be a 30-ish day, 35-day rotation. I'll aim to skim the top 25% or so off the top if I can. sometimes we take a bit more, but as long as we don't come back too quickly. The other key is not staying in the same place for too long. So in the growing season, once we've grazed that plant on day 1, that plant will start to regrow on day 3 or 4. So if we're still in the same area after 4 days, particularly with sheep as well, they'll go back and find that plant that was grazed that is regrowing because it's higher in energy initially, higher in sugars. And that's when we really start to wear the plant down. So basically, if you imagine your grass growth curve, it goes really high and steep in May and June, and then it kind of plateaus off in the summer and dips, and then it bounces up again in the autumn, and then it tails right off in the winter, down to about 0. So if we overgraze and stress the plants in the spring, then all those plants are trying to do is wake up after winter and reproduce. They want to grow and be as dense and as healthy as they can be, and in their own good time, which is probably, you know, getting into the end of June, put a seed head and a flower out to reproduce. If we graze too tightly, too severely, too often, too quickly, we stay in the same place for too long, we come back too fast, then that plant kind of goes into panic mode, and she'll put that little stunty short seed head up really early in the season, and she won't grow very much. So she's going to have short, shallow little roots and a short, stubby little plant above ground with a less nutritious seed above it. So all of a sudden, that grass growth production curve that we all can imagine, or you would know, it'll look the same, but it'll be smaller. So we really want to get the spring grazing right, end of April, May, early June. If we get that right, we set ourselves up for a good year. So if we got that bit right, we get our utilization rates ideal, and our rotation lengths optimal as well. So not taking too much, but definitely not coming back too quick. Make the solar panel grow. Don't stress the plant out. Just get that growth snowballing in your pastures. So what we've then done is create a lot of biomass above ground. So that's the first part of the water cycle. If we've got a lovely, dense, thick set of pasture, when it rains, that's a huge amount. It's like a giant above ground sponge. It holds on to that rain, it slows it down. So with the water cycle, it's about slowing things down. And when the sun comes out after, there's so much biomass trapping onto that moisture, it doesn't all evaporate. So imagine the opposite. We've got a tightly grazed pasture, yeah, where you can probably see some bare ground in between the plants, and you know, it's maybe only a centimetre or 2 tall. When it rains on that pasture, there's nothing really slowing the rain down. So if it's on a slope, it's going to move down the slope a lot faster. If the sun comes out after and it's quite hot, there's nothing insulating it. It's going to evaporate a lot quicker. So then we're not getting effective rainfall. If we get 2 inches of rain, we want to trap 2 inches of rain into our soil. We don't want to lose 1.9 inches to the river back into the clouds, because then guess what? It doesn't take very many dry days until nothing's growing. So we've got that nice dense pasture above the ground, trapping that moisture, slowing it down. Because of those tall plants, they've been able to put those deep roots down deep into the soil, feeding that soil biology, because the dense pasture is also a lovely big solar panel. So we've started to building more soil aggregation. It'll start at the top, and we'll start seeing it get deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's like, it's like having a bucket of concrete, but then all of a sudden the concrete's getting less and less, and there's space for water finally. So the bigger the sponge below ground and the bigger the sponge above ground, that's our ability to hold on to water for a drought, and it's our ability to get rid of water when it's a heavy rain. So these things are all linked, right? The carbon cycle is intrinsically linked and powers the water cycle as well. And this is exactly where we get drought resilience. So if we get the spring grazing right, even if we have a drought for like 3 months, we'll probably be able to navigate through it without really getting too many headaches. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So here's a little bit on that kind of link between carbon and water. Intrinsically linked, like the more carbon we have in the soil, the more water holding capacity that we'll have in our soils as well. So there's a lot of research out there, and it will vary massively depending on your soil type. So if some of you are on heavy clay, compared to kind of light sandy soils, if you've got a 1% increase in organic matter in that sandy soil compared to a 1% increase in the clay, the sandy soil will see a much more exponential improvement in its ability to hold on to water. However, it's also harder to get that 1% increase in organic matter in sandy soils. So, but generally, depending on your soil type, we're going to see, around about 200,000 litres of water a hectare extra holding capacity for every 1% increase in organic matter. So this is getting more photosynthesis, pumping carbon into the soil. This is using our livestock to trample that mature brown pasture and build that humidification from the top down as well. So water and carbon is also intrinsically linked to all the nutrients in our soil. So because we've been losing organic matter over the decades and actually centuries, this isn't just a new thing. This is happening for thousands of years, really, since the invention of the plough. As we lose organic matter, we lose our ability to hold on to water. But with that organic matter goes soil nutrients. So when we've lost 50 to 70% of our organic matter across our farmed soils in the world, that's also 70% of all the nutrients that we potentially had to produce food. So as we can build that back, we're also putting a lot of money back into our system. We can buy nutrients from Bayer, or we can get free nutrients from our soils, from nature, from soil microbiology, and we can build that back through management of our grazing. This leads on nicely to that mineral cycle. So as I said, right, what's in our soil is our bank. It's our bank of water, it's our bank of nutrients, and it's the soil biology that delivers most of that. So soil microbiology actually delivers about 80% of all of the minerals to our pasture and our crops. So the more biologically active our soils are, the more nutrients are moving around and getting to where they need to be. And the nutrients that go into our pasture, guess what? They go into our livestock. So that's when we get better daily live weight gains, because they're getting more nutrition from every bite. That's when we're getting reduced vet and med, because they're naturally healthier, because they're getting everything they need from a more nutrient dense diet in themselves. So how do we do that? Again, rewind back to photosynthesis. The more we think about our grazing management to really facilitate maximizing photosynthesis, to improve that soil structure, aggregation, what that biology needs is energy, air, and water. So when we build that cakey structure, and there's lots of space for the air, and there's lots of space for the water, and those nice, healthy, dense, thick plants with their deep roots are pumping energy into the soil, our biology just wakes up and it multiplies. So that's the aim of the game. And it all bounces back up the system. Healthier soil, healthier pasture, healthier livestock, healthier business, healthier wallets, healthier bank accounts. Again, even broader than that, healthier ecosystem. Our farms are ecosystems. Your valley, your county, it's its own ecosystem. The UK is an ecosystem. So it spirals up onto the global scale, and it all starts in the soil. But it also goes down the other way, because it starts down through the grazing management into the soil. So when we think about those key nutrients that a lot of us might be, using, and same in arable as well, that nitrogen cycle. If you want to reduce your nitrogen inputs, you need to address soil compaction issues and soil biology. So all those little soil aggregates, the little round balls in the soil, they're like mini bioreactors, and inside those there's little rhizobacteria that when the air gets into the nice aggregated soil, those rhizobacteria convert kind of non-plant available nitrogen that comes from the air into plant available nitrogen that our plants can access to use to grow. So if we don't have that aggregation and we don't have that soil biology, then guess what? Our nitrogen cycle is not really working. Hence why we think our grass won't grow without it. But then all of a sudden, when we start to fix soil structure and think about photosynthesis and our grazing management, we might start growing more grass than we've ever grown without any nitrogen inputs. And it's all linked to that biology. It's the same with fungi. So it's the same with phosphorus and fungi. So fungi are responsible almost for the entire phosphate cycle underground. So again, another key macronutrient, and there's 26 odd different macro and micronutrients. None of them are any less important than the other. We only call them micronutrients because they're needed in lesser amounts. So without going too much into the detail on the science, you know, the more we think about soil structure and feed biology, it's like if we're in a compacted soil, imagine a dartboard, then the nutrients we have available for our pasture and our cattle and our food production, we're only operating in the little red bullseye of the dartboard. When we start to fix soil structure, build aggregation, feed soil biology, then all of a sudden we move out of the red bullseye and we start operating in the whole big dartboard. So our total bank account of nutrients and the courier delivery drivers that move all the resources around underground, which is our soil biology, we've got a much bigger pool, right? Again, it's the same with like our predator microbes as well. So again, things like protozoa, they need air and water to be able to move. They're kind of like these little wormy things that are smaller than worms that they go around eating bacteria. And when they do that, out the back of the protozoa, they'll basically crap out plant available nitrogen. But protozoa need air and water to move. So again, it all links back to photosynthesis to build aggregates. Things with decomposition as well. So it's not just what's going on below ground, which is obviously a big part, but nutrients like potassium and sulfur are really linked to the decomposition of material above ground. So that's why compost can be a really great input, particularly in arable farms, if you're deficient in organic matter, potassium and sulfur, which most of them are. Or in a grazing sense, then maybe we're doing something like bale grazing, unrolling hay bales on our pastures, whether that's in a drought situation to slow our animals down, or in the winter as part of an extended grazing strategy or an outwintering strategy, or in the summer when it's like a really, you know, we've got tall kind of standing hay type pastures and everything's a bit brown, we can get the animals really dense with our fencing, and maybe they're trampling a huge amount of that back into the ground. That's really going to light up that sulfur and potassium cycle. And obviously these nutrients are really key for pasture and plant growth, but same with animal health and performance as well. Next one is our airflow. Again, all intrinsically linked, right? But airflow, I like to think on these three different layers. We've got this macro landscape layer. So you ever been to like, you know, when you go to the coast in Cornwall or somewhere, and there's like that one sad little tree that's all stunted over on his own on the side of a cliff, and it's like a little bonsai tree. It's basically, it's reduced growth rate because of constant air pressure. And it's the same in pastures. So the natural biome of the UK, i.e. what did our country look like before we started farming it and kind of living in it as more modern humans, if we rewound to like Stonehenge basically on earlier, it was actually a wood pastoral landscape. There was parts of our country that were thick, dense woodland, kind of temperate Atlantic rainforest and broadleaf woodland, but most of it was a mosaic, scrubby, pastoral tree landscape with herbivores like Eurasian bison roaming around and deer being gobbled up by wolves and bears. So because of that, all of our natural ecology in our grass species and everything else, a lot of our birds, butterflies, everything perform better in partial shade, because that's how they've evolved over many millennia since you know, various ice ages. So you'll notice it on your own farms as well. When you go out, you know, next summer or next spring, you'll see that often where the growth is best is, particularly when it's, you know, in a dry spell, it will be where the trees and hedges are, where it's cooler. So again, this isn't a quick fix. If we don't have trees and hedgerows on our landscape, we can't just magic them up, but we can plant them and start designing our farming systems to think about how do we slow airflow down. So in the winter time, trees and hedgerows slow the airflow down, and it creates warmth and insulation. So your livestock, that's where they'll go when it's cold and wet and windy. They'll perform better. They won't be burning so many calories keeping warm. It's the inverse in the summer. So when it's really hot, guess where they are? In the trees and in the hedgerows. It's the same with the pastures, yeah? Your pastures will be more productive, more resilient when there's more of that mosaic partial shade. So the more we can think about hedges and trees, the better. The next layer down, with all the same, it's all the same science, if you like, is the airflow in and around our pasture and our residuals. So if you imagine again, whether it's a hot day in the summer or a cold, windy, wet day in the winter, if we've got tightly grazed pastures, then in the summer, the soil in and around those pastures is going to be hotter and it's going to get drier really quickly. And the soil is going to start baking and compacting from the top down. In the winter time, it's going to do the opposite. So the tightly grazed pastures or topped or whatever we've done in the autumn, in the winter or the end of autumn, they're going to be colder. They're going to sit there colder for longer. So in the summer, when we've got like more insulation, more of that biomass above ground, if you get your hands down into the pasture, you'll notice it's much cooler. And actually, you'll notice it's probably still quite damp, even if it hasn't rained in a number of days or even weeks. So this is about creating insulation effects above the soil in our pasture heights and residuals. So it's not just how much pasture we have when we get there, it's how much do we leave when we leave behind when the animals leave as well. So in the winter, for example, a great example is pastures that I want to graze early in the spring. Bearing in mind I graze all year round, I won't graze as tightly in the autumn compared to other pastures that I either want to graze in the winter or that I'm going to come back and graze later in the summer next year. Because if I don't graze those early spring pastures as tight in the autumn or early winter, and I leave more behind, the soil underneath throughout the whole winter is going to stay warmer and more insulated. So when our soil temperature gets to 7 degrees, that's when our soil biology starts to wake up. When our biology starts to wake up and our soil is warmer, that's when our plants will grow. So you can do it even in the same field, like cut a field in half at the end of next winter or whatever, at the end of next summer, graze one side really tight and just take 50% from the other half and then leave that field. Come back in January and February, the field that was grazed really tight will probably look the same. The field that was grazed half, it would probably be double in height of pasture, let alone getting into March and April. So that's how this is how you create that grass wedge earlier in the season. You'll physically start to grow pasture quicker than your neighbor or quicker than other parts of the farms that you grazed in that winter time. The next layer down on that airflow piece, as I said before, it's the air going into the soil. So again, the tall plants, the deep roots, building aggregation, creating space for air, getting air in so that nitrogen cycle can happen so our biology can breathe. It's also linked to thermodynamics and all sorts of stuff. So we can get into the sciencey stuff. But basically, when we get those four things right, when we get more carbon flowing through our system, it's a bit of a woo-woo fairy picture from Google Gemini, but there you go. When we get more carbon and energy flowing through the system, when we get more water slowing down and stored in our soils, when we get more airflow, allowing our plants to do better, our livestock can get into our soil that can feed the biology, and we unlock that mineral cycle, we get more nutrition going from our soils to our plants to our animals, we get a big boom in diversity, both below ground in our soil biology, above ground in our pasture ecology, and also scaling up from that. You'll see more insects, we'll see more birds, we'll see more mammals. And they're the things you start to see first that's really obvious. And that's how we get the resilience, right? The resilience is there because we've created the drought resilience. We've got that safety net when it gets dry. When it rains, there's somewhere for that water to go. Our animals are performing better from less inputs. There's more nutrition and minerals flowing through that farming system from the sun to the pasture to the soil and bouncing all the way back up again into our livestock, which impacts daily live weight gains and fertility. So that's really how we get nature to do the hard yards, and that's really thinking about how do we design those grazing systems. So how am I doing for time, Katie, just quickly?
It's just after 1:45. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay, we'll be wrapped up by 8, is that all right? And then a few questions. Cool.
Yeah, that's fine.
So how are we actually going to do this? So with as I said, just keep thinking, right? The aim of the game is to maximize photosynthesis, utilize roots, and get that biology working hard. And the three things that we're playing with is these three tools: grazing, animal impact, and time. So grazing is the act of that animal taking that plant. So when that happens, whether it's a cow wrapping around with her tongue and snatching it, or a sheep nibbling down with her teeth, whether that is a severe grazing, taking it right down to the crown, or a light grazing, whether it happens in May or December, whatever the different variable or conditions are, there will be a response from that plant. The plant will send chemical signals into the soil will respond. So we can get that grazing event right to allow that plant to really bounce back with vigor and not get stressed, or we can stress that plant out and basically shoot ourselves in the foot and start losing the total amount of pasture and our kind of pasture resilience. So for me, that's kind of in the spring. As I said, we'll aim to take as little as possible and leave as much behind as we can without coming back too quick. And that will look different on every farm. And even within the farm, we're running like 2 or 3 mobs that might look different across each mob. But that's the general rule of thumb. So in spring, we probably don't want to be coming back any quicker than 30 days, maybe 28 at push, but it obviously depends on the growing conditions and where we are. In the summer, obviously we've snowballed the amount of pasture we've got and we've managed it well, so our pasture's taller. Or maybe we want to take more like 50% and leave half in the autumn. As I said, we're a bit more nuanced with where we need animals to go in the spring, etc. And in the winter, we'll flip it. We'll take like 75%. We'll get more animal days grazing per hectare, and we'll graze more and leave less. So the picture on the left-hand side, so the farm, it's not the farm I'm at now, but the farm I used to manage was actually a research farm, 1,500 acres on the edge of Oxford, kind of did supply chain research. It was medium heavy clay on a floodplain. So 60% of that farm basically went underwater every winter. It was on the Thames floodplain. So we didn't have a huge amount of area to send the cattle in the wintertime, but we send them up to these valleys. We'd have about 200 head of sucklers on half a hectare with, I think it was 4 or 5 hay bales, depending on the opening covers that autumn. And that would do us per 24-hour period. And what we would see is that on the left, there's no mud, there's no poaching, there's still green there from the pasture. You can see how we've unrolled the hay bales. It's like we've left some behind, but that's exactly intentional. We want the cows to trample some of that carbon in, some of that seed, and as well as that muck and urine. So that's the animal impact piece. Animal impact is the trampling, the sitting down, the saliva and all the enzymes that we get in the saliva that creates chemical signals in our plant, and our muck, our urine. Time is that piece I said around overgrazing. How long are we in the same place for, and how long until we come back again? So getting the right combination across those 3 things, grazing, animal impact, and time, that's going to look very different on every farm, in different seasons and different growing conditions. Or even if it's just, we've got a TB test and we've got 2 members of staff on holiday, like we're going to tweak the grazing plan and these things are going to change. What we want to do is get that balance right. So we're going to get different outcomes at different times of the year to make the overall system better the following season. So what does this look like in beef and sheep? So this is a picture. So this is in the drought of 2022 on that farm, that research farm I mentioned. So this was one of our mobs of sucklers. I think our stocking rate was 1.7 grazing livestock units a hectare, and this is with 0 ghost acres. So this farm was 100% pasture fed. We didn't buy in any feed, we didn't buy in any straw, we didn't buy in any fertilizer. So example would be if we've got a 200 acre farm, but we buy in 100 acres of straw and feed, then actually our stocking rate is spread over 300 acres. So that's our ghost acres. It's the acres we've bought from stuff we've bought somewhere else. So no ghost acres, year-round grazing. This is actually on the floodplain. So in this time of year, this would be underwater. But it hadn't rained on this farm from the first week in June, and it didn't rain until the 14th of September. This photo was taken at the end of August. And you can see on the left, you can see the fence post up the middle. On the left there, is it's still green. We've left about 50% behind, and they've just gone into the right hand side of that pasture. And what was really interesting is I had a group of farmers in this field at the end of August. I said it hadn't rained for like 3 months, and we got our hands down into the pasture and we pushed our fingers into the soil, and like 1 digit of our finger down, it was still damp. And also when we walked if we walked on the farm in the morning before the sun came up through that tall long grass, we got wet feet and wet jeans. So that was just from transpiration, that was from the plants kind of drawing in moisture from the atmosphere and everything else. We created our own mini water cycle. So our pasture stayed green, it stayed productive. Our animal daily live weight gains didn't drop. We were finishing everything in 22 months on average. The slowest we're going in 24 months, the quickest in I think 20 or 19, but on average 22 months finishing times on 100% pasture. And that even happened in the drought year and also in those wettest winters on records. And it didn't change basically. When we had the better grazing season the year before and the wet summer after, nothing fluctuated in our daily live weight gains and finishing times. They were consistent without any feed inputs. Similar with fertility. So our fertility rates would sit in that mid 90%, like 93, 94%. Across the 100 or so suckler cows. We had dairy stores as well, 150 odd suckler dairy stores. Everything through the suckler side we kept till finish. But yeah, so we were getting 94% in calf, and again that fertility rate didn't fluctuate in those dry years. So that's a real example of we got the grazing right. So in the spring, which gave us a safety net for the drought that came. You know, we got our rotation stretched out to like, I think it was 85 days on this block. So actually they only went around this block once, and we still left half behind. And by the time it rained in the 14th of September, they'd just started the second rotation, but we'd gone back onto pasture we'd left behind. So when it rained on the 14th of September and hit that tall, dense grass, even the stuff we'd grazed, it all just went whoosh, and you wouldn't have known that we'd had a drought. It was quite amazing, really. So that's kind of like some of the potential we see in beef and sheep. What a lot of people ask me is, oh, well, with tall pasture, isn't it less nutritious? Therefore, we don't actually get good growth rates. So the answer to that is, well, firstly, once we get more carbon and energy going through the system and we get better soil structure, more biology, we've got more mineral cycle going into the plant. So the overall nutrition in the plant will be higher. But what we actually have is most of the nutrition in a grass plant sits in the top 30-odd%. It's in like the top bit of the plant. So if we go into a tall pasture in the summer and we make the cows graze it right down to the ground, yeah, the bottom half of it is mainly stem and fiber. There's not a lot of nutrition. But that's when our utilization rate is too high. We've taken too much. So if we're only like taking the top 50% or whatever it might be, they're only grazing where all the nutrition is. And what they're leaving behind is biomass to hold on to rain, to insulate moisture, and to keep that photosynthesis moving. So it's all about getting the balance of your utilization rates and your residuals. So again, like a lot of this is dependent on our infrastructure. So the main one's water. Once we can get enough water and move it with the cows, kind of Bob's your uncle, and you can really get animals anywhere. So if we're in a more upland setting and there's not a lot of water around and we're on a big hill, then obviously like what this looks like and the outcomes we'll get will be very different than if we're on like a lowland farm with like a 50 mil pipe ring main with like 12 bar of pressure pump or whatever. And same with fencing. So, we can use mobile electric fencing. You can obviously use permanent fencing and have a more rotational cycle. But basically the more flex we can give ourselves with the right infrastructure or good infrastructure, fencing and water, that's it really, the more flexibility we have to really get the outcomes we want. I mentioned the daily live weight gain and finishing times. As I said, like these systems are mutually beneficial. We can get really good production, really good metrics, really good profitability with all that kind of climate resilient stuff. Fertility as well, parasite cycles. So in our sheep, so this farm was organic for 20 years, but it was quite conventionally managed in that organic sense. It was kind of lots of set stocking of sheep and cows over big areas and not moving them very often. So every summer without fail, it was basically a drought. and every winter it was too waterlogged and everything was inside in sheds. But then in this research project, which I'm talking about, we moved to adaptive multi-paddock grazing. What happened on this farm when we put this kind of grazing system in place with the same genetics and everything else? What was one great thing we saw in the sheep was that after 2 decades of having loads of wormer resistance, like they were resistant to every type of wormer we could get, despite being organic, we'd actually reduced our worm treatment usage by 75% just in that first grazing season, because we broke the parasite cycle. Our rotation lengths were much longer, so the parasites didn't find a host. And also we weren't grazing down on the shallow bits above the soil where all the parasites live, because they don't like UV rays. Basically, they're UV sensitive. Even the sheep were grazing in taller pastures. They kind of knock it over and graze the tops off. They weren't hoovering the pastures up there in the first place. As I said earlier, kind of all linked with our drought and rainfall resilience. This actually doesn't take very long. When you get water infrastructure right, ideally, what we want to be doing, if we can, is run as few groups of animals as possible, and if we can, even one. Because the more groups we have, the more checks we've got to do, the more fences we have to move, the more troughs we have to move, just the more time we do just doing stock. You're going to spend 5 times more time having 10 groups of 50 animals than having one group of 500. So depending on your context and infrastructure, you could have everything done with a herd of 500 in an hour every day, and then you've got the rest of the day to do what the hell you need to do. That isn't doing livestock. Which leads into the next point, that kind of work-life balance. Like, some of us want more time with the kids, or go to the rugby on the weekend, have a barbecue, right? We can really design these systems to be as heavy or hands-on as you want or not. That's a big thing for me. I want everything done in half an hour to an hour max every day. And with all this stuff, as I said, when we're getting more from nature, that mineral cycle is pumping hard. We've got a huge amount of production, fertility, daily live weight gains. We're getting better margins. Our daily live weight gains are getting faster. Our finishing times are quicker. We can run more livestock because we're producing more pasture, and we're not doing it with inputs. So we're increasing the production, or the speed of the production. We're lowering the direct cost. So our margins can get massively different from where they might have been before. And we also generally see better stock longevity as well. We've got cows lasting longer, less health issues. I'll wrap it up quick on the dairy. So dairy is a bit of a different beast, because I guess the genetics of a lot of our dairy herd has moved quite extreme into that kind of growth production side of the hormones, which is why we see poorer fertility rates, more lameness, more health issues, less longevity. And also we're trying to squeeze a lot out of the system to kind of meet these milk contracts with low milk prices and blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that dairy should all of a sudden just be like a few cows and calves at foot. That works for some people that are, getting a high premium, but for commercial dairy, we can still get some really good gains. Again, just by thinking about getting that soil structure improved, we can start to think about reducing nitrogen inputs, more diversity in our pastures as well. We're going to get pastures that are going to perform in different weather conditions. Again, get better health balance in our livestock as well. Again, I hope we can start reducing that feed purchase. There's lots of different things we can look at. Some of it might be that, because of slurry applications or whatever, we've got really high potassium indices in our farm. So how can we buffer that? Again, like cover cropping, herbal lays, or even like putting out carbon inputs that can chelate and bind onto that excess potassium. There's all sorts of different tools that we can play with. It's not saying that inputs are bad. Actually, some inputs can be the exact thing we need, but it's about using the right tool at the right time for the right reason to get the outcomes we want. And again, you could take 100 dairy farms, and what this would look like would be different 100 times over. But these are just generally some of the things that we should be able to see. But there's obviously probably more challenges, I think, or even limitations with where we can get with dairy in this country compared to beef and sheep. So practical takeaways before we wrap up. Like, if you take anything away from this, it's really thinking about how can we tweak our grazing management to really facilitate photosynthesis. The bigger and the more you know, the bigger and the healthier and the more kind of vigorous our plants are, and the more diversity we get, and basically the better the plug that we have from the sun to the soil, that's when all this magic happens. That's when we build the soil aggregation, we feed that soil biology, we increase our ability to hold on to water, and all this stuff kind of starts slotting into place, focusing on that. So where do we start? Like, you know, we can start with thinking about like a grazing plan. It's something I help people with as well, both in mixed systems with arable and everything else. So we understand really like actually what's our plan for the next 12 to 18 months, you know, and also what's our plan B and our plan C and our plan D if we get that big drought, if we get that cold spring, like what are these different outcomes? And we've already figured it out and got it on the board with what we're going to do. Some low-hanging fruit, really simple stuff, right? If we're going to put our mob of cows in this field for 4 weeks, then just cut the field in half, you know, put a quick electric fence up and put them in each half for 2 weeks. They can still be in that field for 4 weeks, but the half you grazed first has had 2 weeks rest and recovery by the time they actually leave the field. So that's 2 weeks more time than it would have had if they just had the whole field. And then how more can we go? Cut it into 4s. Then when they leave, they can still do a week in each quarter, but when they leave the final quarter, the first quarter's had 3 weeks of no grazing pressure. That's the difference of it being like that tall in pasture and it being that tall in pasture. You know, little wins like that can make a big difference. Seeing's believing, right? You can hear all this crap from me, oh yeah, right, how it doesn't work. But you will find people that, you know, and I'm sure some of you might be playing with some of these ideas, you know, reach out to that neighbor or go on that farm walk, you know, get out on other farms and just see how other people have made it work. But just remember, everyone's context is different. How it has worked somewhere else might not necessarily be the way that it works for you. But even within that, how it works for us today, this year in 2026, might not be the same blueprint. We don't want to use a blueprint. It might be the same system or the same plan that works next year or in 3 years' time. So, you know, data and monitoring doesn't really excite many people, but for me, the main thing is field observation, stuff that you see every day, just walking your pastures, noticing like funny shapes or discolorations in your pasture plants will indicate if you're deficient in certain minerals or even have excesses. Good one for me is just, what does it feel like underfoot? First thing I notice when I walk onto a client's farm is the pasture hard and firm, or is it quite spongy and light and feel warm? That's going to tell me immediately, give me clues about soil aggregation, about their ability to hold on to water, all that kind of stuff. Also reduce friction, right? If we want to start playing with this and like cutting fields up into smaller sections, you know, get good fencing kit, you know, put a rig and a box on your quad so you can carry all this stuff around and you're not walking around doing it with a bloody wheelbarrow. You know, make it as quick and slick as possible, and it just really won't be a chore, and you might want to quite enjoy it actually. So that's about it from me. Rabbited on, I couldn't see any of you, so hopefully you're still there. You might have gone by now, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've had a question come in, so I'll ask that one whilst others are thinking of questions. So Nigel's asked, in a scenario like the one you've outlined, how long does pasture take to adapt and adjust to new management?
It will really depend. So I keep throwing this word out there of context. So context is like all these different variables that make you and your farm unique. So this can be your soil type, it can be historical management, it can be your carbon to nitrogen ratio, your calcium to magnesium ratio, which plays a big role in like your natural soil structure. You know, it's really hard to say you will see this benefit in this amount of time. However, I've not been on a farm that I've managed, worked on, or supported someone where we have not seen significant improvements and changes within that first grazing season. You know, we might not be fully transformed and be perfect, but we never get there anyway. It's always a journey. We're always learning and tweaking. But comparing from where, you know, we might be one summer compared to the previous, we can certainly see some big changes pretty quickly, which is why I think this stuff, when people start playing with it and doing it, they get really addicted, because it's a really quick feedback loop. You know, as I said earlier about describing that thing, just cut the field in half, cut it in 4. Yeah, that 1 month, you're going to see a difference in that field just in that first month. And that in farming terms, that's light speed, right? We can do something for 20 years, or we'll do this for 20 years and we might see an improvement of this much. We can do something different for 1 month and we can see a benefit immediately.
Okay, thank you. Is that all right, Nigel? Or have you got any other? You can always just unmute and.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Hang on. There's quite a few people, or would you class this as regen or not?
The more I do this, the more people I work with, I don't like, some people like to use that label and it gives them a sense of, you know, community and identity. Like for me, I don't really care. For me, it is about helping farmers, well, whatever they call themselves. You know, I've got clients that are conventional, using nitrogen and all the inputs under the sun. I've got some that are organic. It's about building businesses that excite you, that help address challenges and meet the goals that you have. And for me, in a grazing system, some of the stuff I've discussed here is how I've done that in farms I've managed and how I've helped other people. So some people might call it regen because it's, you know, tall grass and moving cows, but you know, some others might just call it, you know, good farming or whatever that excites you. So if regen scares you and puts you off, then don't call it that. But if you like it, then you can call it that.
I mean, a lot of it makes real sense, but in our situation, infrastructure is a bit of a problem, really, particularly water, because we're on slopes, and getting water to the top of the hill is a bit of a problem.
Yeah, well, that's how we tweak it, right? So again, there's not like one way to do this. There's not one way to set the system, or we have to use electric fencing or whatever. You know, that we will help build a grazing plan and a system that works within your context. And a part of that is things like, you know, your topography, your geography, your infrastructure, your skill set, your equipment, you know, all of that kind of thing. I've never done a grazing plan that looks the same as the previous or the one after.
Okay, fine. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any questions? It's like Thomas has come on as yep, go on then, Thomas.
So thank you. That's been interesting, and definitely soil structure is part of the whole thing. My question is more about, given the winter we've had here in Northern Ireland, it has not stopped raining. Soil is completely saturated, and fields that I always considered were really free draining, I can now see evidence in areas where they're not as good as other bits. And my question is really about field drainage. Is it appropriate, or should we just let nature be, and if ground's wet, stay off it?
Again, like it's hard to say. Like I think it like that we could give a different answer depending on so many different variables. But you know, I mentioned subsoiling, so I'm not saying like we shouldn't do it and we don't need to do it. Like sometimes that could be the right decision to make, but it shouldn't be the go-to thing, because it's treating the symptom. Something like subsoiling and helping drainage or field drains or whatever, it's helping deal with the system of the water logging. Whereas we could do that and think about our grazing management and all that kind of stuff to address soil structure, and then we're addressing the root cause. So it might be that we look at our grazing management and keep using those tools that are treating the symptoms in tandem until we get to the point where the soil structure's improved so much we don't need to treat the symptom anymore. So, you know, and that might take a year, it might take 5 years, you know, and it might be that in one field but not another. So I think again it's about taking that, when I said at the start about that context specific holistic approach, looking at the whole big picture of your farming business, all the things going on, all that kind of stuff, and And again, it's a really unique thing to come up with that plan, but there's no tool that's off the shelf unless it's illegal. It's just getting the right tool at the right time. And what I'm talking about today isn't about chucking the old tools out. It's just about adding more tools to the toolbox and understanding how we can use those in different ways.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Paul.
Yes, Silas. We have a rotational grazing system in play here. But one of our problems, or my problem, is I've never had the courage to go into very large batches. You talked about your, 10 batches of 50 or one batch of 500. So from a suckler cow point of view, having 100 suckler cows or 150 suckler cows plus their calves plus multiple bulls then seems to be a real stumbling block. Have you experienced people doing that type of thing?
Yeah, again, context, right? So if your farm is all in one big block, and you've got the main thing with the size of your groups, by the way, is how much water can you supply that group. So if you've got 20 mil pipe on just like average mains water and pressure, yeah, you might not get more than 30 cows in a group. But if you've got a big, like one of my clients has got like a 63 mil ring main, it's like that big, and a massive pump. So we could he's on 5,000 acres. Like we can have big mobs. So check your flow rates. We can do that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I got a table somewhere for that. Once we know your flow rate, and we want to match that to water demand at peak lactation. So in the height of summer, say you've calved in April, May, what's your water requirement for a certain amount of cows in, say, July and August when it's hot, and we'll match your water infrastructure capacity to that. So that's generally the first place to start about thinking about mob sizes. If you've got the all singing, all dancing, fancy water, or like big lakes or wherever, however it works, and that's not a headache, then it might come down to geography. So if you've got one big block, then that might work really easily. But if you've got blocks of land here and there, you're better off having a mob on each block, right? So I would say push the group sizes as much as you dare, and you just get confidence with it, because you will find you start saving a lot of time, and actually the animals love it too. They've got that kind of social structure that they all love. They don't really like having the mob of the 1-year-old heifers over there and the 2-year-olds there, and you whatever. Like they're always trying to get back together, right? So I think there's lots of different benefits to it. There's the labor side, and the productivity. So for every mob you've got, you're basically running a separate farm, and there's grazing pressure on multiple points. So when there's one mob, there's only one point of grazing pressure. So the majority, all of your farm pretty much is in rest and recovery. So yeah, start with your flow rate, time that, get a bucket, basically cut your pipe in different places, because obviously different water lines will have different pressures, but the further away you get from the water input, you'll start losing pressure because of the friction. So time that into a bucket, how many liters per minute, times that by 60 to get how many liters per hour. And then if you ask me, get my details from Katie, I'll email you my tab for calculating lactation, water demands and stuff, and you can start figuring out where you might start with group sizes and numbers. But yeah, I recommend it. It's a big win especially on that labor time piece.
And multiple bulls then, running, let's say 3-4 bulls with 100 cows.
Yeah. Again, I would do that too. Like again, depends on your system. Like if you're a pedigree guy and you're selling the genetics, then obviously you can chuck all the bulls in, but then you're gonna have to take the cost to like test the send the hair samples in on the calves to see what bull goes with what cow. But if you're just if we're just producing beef and we got a cross of whatever, and it doesn't really matter who the sire is, we just need to know it's an Angus or whatever, and you've got 4 Angus bulls, then it's really no headache doing that. The journey with the bulls though, I've got a lot of mates that do this. I would do this if we needed more bulls right now, but generally keep them together all year. And if you can, I'd also try and buy them in batches. So if you go to your bull man that you buy your bulls from, by 4 bulls that have been in the pen together. So they've already done the whole tussling around and got their own hierarchy. But if you buy like 4 mature bulls from different farms and just bung them in together, there'll probably be a fair bit of fighting and until they figure that out. And then when they come out of the herd, again, keep them together to keep them in the same field, and they keep that hierarchy really kind of stable. I mean, I got a mate on Salisbury Plain. He's got 800 sucklers. I think he's got like 60 bulls, and all the bulls are in the same paddock together now. And then I'll just go out in teams of like 6, 7, 8 or whatever, and then come back in again.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat. There is very poor persistency with modern grass varieties if you leave high residuals or trample high residuals, with modern grass varieties dying out very quickly and swards reverting to native grasses with low D values. Is there grass varieties that suit different soil types for reverting to extended high intensity grazing rotation?
Yeah, so again, that comes back to that diversity piece. Like a lot of these like modern type grasses grown in labs, right? They've been grown to do well in very specific conditions and often with input. So, and again, they're often not that great interacting with biology and root. Like ryegrass has quite a shallow root example, and it just doesn't do well when it's hot, when it's dry, when it's cold. So yeah, oh God, this could take 20 minutes, but there's a slide we could have gone through, which is succession. So the plants we will see above ground will be a reflection of the state of our soil below the ground. So the more compaction we have, the more soil bacteria, the lack of air, etc., lack of biology, we're going to see more of the survival type species. So this is our broadleaf weeds, our thistles, our docks, and only a few types of grasses. When we start to fix soil structure, and again, it's not saying right in grazing season 1, all of a sudden we're going to change our grazing management. We're going to have like 100 different types of plant species, and it's all going to be great. Some farms might start near that, others might not. So it's how do we move up this scale? Like when we start fixing the structure, more air, more water, more minerals, the plants that we see come up in our pastures will change. That's when you start to walk your fields and you notice plants you've never seen before. It might be the starting point, but that's where we can get to. Maybe we've put some of that seed there initially, but that will always evolve. That's why when we put a herbal lay in to like an arable farm, we see all the flowers in year 1 because they're annual plants that do well in degraded soil, which has been cultivated. And then over years 2, 3, and 4, 5, the perennials start to dominate and the annuals fizzle out because it's actually started to fix the soil structure. So you'll start to see more grasses come through, like your cocksfoot, timothies. So in answer to your question, modern varieties, they are there because if they're not persisting or whatever plants are coming up instead, they are the plants that are suited to the soil conditions below ground. So just tweak the grazing management. Even if we put some more diverse seeds in there to start with different root structures and root types to break up that compaction, then that ecology will naturally start to evolve. If that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Silas. It's been I love the picture of the roots with all the different colours, just showing all what's going on underneath the soil, and I think it really brings it all to life. And I think, yeah, seeing is believing. I've often said to people when they're not sure what to do, try half a field and not the other half, or try half the herd and not the other half if you're not sure what to do. So do have a think about what you might want to do. If you haven't got your grazing plan, first things first, go and start and get a grazing plan down. And yeah, just think about what small things. It hasn't got to be everything changed at once, has it? It's about those small little things, tweaking little bits and pieces, and they'll all those small changes can actually add up to bigger wins. So yeah, there's a lot to think about tonight, and a lot of food for thought. So hopefully it's given you all some nuggets to take away tonight and think about. But thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us this evening.
Cheers for having me, guys.
Cheers. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening.
Bye bye.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.